I'm Scott Allard, Associate Professor at the University of Chicago School of Social Service Administration. We chose to do this study because recent data from the census indicated that poverty rates in suburban communities were rising at a much faster rate than in cities. In fact, some data show that in the largest metropolitan areas, there are more poor people numerically in suburbs than in the cities of those metro areas. But there's reason to be concerned about whether there's safety net assistance in the suburban communities that are experiencing the highest increases in poverty. We know in central city neighborhoods there aren't access to great resources to help low-income people, and we were concerned that this was true in suburban communities as well. First, not surprisingly, we found that demand was rising in all these communities for help. But what was surprising was that the kind of people seeking help was really different than what we might typically expect. A lot more two-parent households, households where both people were working, where people were even working a full-time job maybe, but they just weren't making enough money to make ends meet, or had lost work hours, and so were unable to provide for their families. The needs of clients were changing as well. So in addition to food assistance or job search assistance, which many families needed, many families were having a hard time keeping their home, paying utility payments, and in some cases reporting incidents of domestic violence at a much higher rate than had been seen before in these communities. It was really striking to see that many social service agencies were having a hard time serving the needs of the communities around them. Many organizations were experiencing funding cuts, both from their government grants and contracts, but also from private sources. And that's typical during a recessionary period. Our safety net often contracts right when need rises the most. What this meant is that in many communities where need was rising, providers had fewer resources, fewer programs, fewer staff to help. And that creates kind of a bitterly ironic situation for low-income populations as they seek to cope with job loss, find work, and provide for their families. Apart from the challenges of financing services and programs, suburban nonprofits face a really interesting challenge of covering large geographic areas. There's great variation in the help that's available, and so you can find suburban communities that look quite similar in terms of the percentage of people who are poor or low skill, but some communities will have many more service providers than others, and that means where you live in suburbs actually has a greater impact on what you can access if you're in need than we typically think. There are several things we can do as citizens and as a society. First, it's important to keep in mind that Americans are really generous. We give about $300 billion a year to private charities, but only about 10% of that goes to charities that help low-income people. On top of that, suburban nonprofits have a hard time connecting with private donors because of the perception that poverty is an exclusively urban phenomenon. In addition to private giving, it's important for Americans to continue to volunteer with nonprofit organizations in their communities. Whether it's bagging a sack of groceries or conducting fund drives, volunteers can provide important resources and time to nonprofits that are experiencing cuts in staff and finances. But also important are social service programs that provide job training, child care, mental health and substance abuse services for families as they seek to find work, keep a job, or advance in the labor market. Ultimately, if we don't provide support for the bundle of public programs that are available to low-income Americans, it'll be hard for all our communities, urban or suburban, to emerge from the recession.